Once upon a time, in an African town named Goma, there lived a young girl named Lima. Lima was as sharp as a needle, though she was just 9 years old. Her mind was quick, her hands were busy, and her smile was like the first rain after a long dry season. Everyone in the town said, "This girl is no ordinary child." Her father, Giwa, loved her more than words could say. "My princess," he often called her, pride filling his voice like a drumbeat. Lima was the star of her school, always coming home with marks that made her father's chest swell. "You will be great, my daughter," Giwa would say, patting her head. When Lima turned 14, Giwa knew she was ready for more. He enrolled her in secondary school, even though she was younger than the others. "You will learn and soar higher than the birds," he told her. But Giwa was a trader, always traveling to faraway lands, buying and selling goods. He could not stay long at home, so Giwa hired a lesson teacher, Mr. Mako. "Teach my daughter well," he said, handing him the task. Mr. Mako came often, his face strict like the Harmattan wind. At first, he seemed like a good teacher, helping Lima with her books. But while Giwa was away, things were not perfect at home. Lima's mother, Salma, was as beautiful as a peacock, but her heart seemed far from her home. Salma loved to dress in fine clothes, paint her face like the rising sun, and dance the nights away at parties. She left the house early, her perfume trailing behind her like a whisper, and returned only when the moon was tired of shining. Lima longed for her mother's care, her warmth, even just a moment to talk. But Salma never stayed still long enough to notice. Her laughter and chatter were always reserved for the parties she loved, leaving her daughter behind in a house that felt too big and too quiet. One night, Lima sat in the small living room, her heart heavy with a secret she had to share. She heard the ticking of the clock, each sound like a hammer on her chest. She had prepared herself, whispering, "Tonight, I'll tell her." She'll listen this time. As the hours passed and the shadows grew longer, Lima's eyes began to close, but she had to stay awake. She filled a small basin with icy water and dipped her feet inside, the chill biting her skin. It was her way of fighting sleep, of holding on to hope. But the night turned into morning, and Salma still hadn't come home. Lima's heart sank, heavy as a stone dropped into a deep well. When the first rays of sunlight kissed the earth, Lima rose quickly. She went straight to her mother's room, determined to speak. But the bed was empty, the covers untouched. Salma was gone again. Tears welled in Lima's eyes, but she blinked them away. "Maybe next time," she told herself, her voice trembling. And so, the day began, with Lima carrying the weight of her untold words, like a bird forced to fly with broken wings. One warm afternoon, the air in Goma town felt heavy, as if it carried a secret no one wanted to tell. Mr. Mako arrived at Lima's house for her usual lesson, his face strict as always. He carried his books, but behind his glasses, his eyes carried something darker. The house was still, with no sound but the scratch of chalk on paper and the occasional creak of a chair. Mr. Mako sat across from Lima, watching her as she solved the problems he had given. After a while, he asked casually, "Is your mother home?" Lima, without looking up, shook her head. "No, sir. She went out." Mr. Mako smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. It was like the grin of a hyena stalking its prey. "Let's take a break," he said, standing up. Lima followed him into the kitchen, thinking he wanted to eat. But as she reached for a bowl, she heard the soft click of the door locking. Her heart jumped, and she turned to see Mr. Mako standing close behind her. "Mr. Mako," she began, her voice trembling. "What are you doing?" Instead of answering, he reached out and grabbed her arm. His hands were rough, and his touch made her skin crawl. "Don't scream," he whispered, his voice sharp like a knife. "If you tell anyone, I'll make sure you fail all your exams. They'll send you away from school." And just like that, he forcefully slept with her without anyone knowing. Tears spilled from Lima's eyes, but her voice stayed trapped in her throat. Mr. Mako touched her where he shouldn't, his hands like the claws of a monster. She felt frozen, like a small bird caught in a hawk's grip. When he was done, he stepped back, straightened his shirt and said, "Go and get me some food." His voice was calm as if nothing had happened. Lima's hands shook as she served him. When he finished eating, he stood and said, "Remember, not a word to anyone." Then he left, leaving her alone in the suffocating silence. That night, Salma came home earlier than usual. Her face was tired, but Lima didn't care. She ran to her mother's room, her heart pounding like a drum. "Mama, I need to tell you something," she said, her voice trembling. "What is it, Lima?" Salma asked, her voice sharp and impatient. "It's about the lesson teacher. Before Lima could finish, Salma cut her off. "Don't start making excuses. You just don't want to study, do you? Always looking for a way to be lazy." "But Mama," "I said enough," Salma snapped, brushing her daughter aside as she went to her room. Lima stood there, her words swallowed by her mother's anger. She felt smaller than ever, like a bird trapped in a cage with no one to hear its song. That night, she cried herself to sleep, her pillow wet with tears and her heart heavy with silence. Lima's world became dark, like a stormy sky with no sunlight. She carried a heavy burden, one too big for her small shoulders. At school, her once bright mind became clouded. She stared blankly at the blackboard, unable to focus. Her teachers called her name, but she barely heard them. At night, she cried silently, her pillow soaked with tears. Her body grew thinner, her laughter disappeared, and her eyes, once sparkling, were now dull. The joy that used to fill her heart was gone, replaced by fear and sadness. Mr. Mako, the lesson teacher, continued to visit. Each time, his presence felt like a dark shadow creeping into the house. He would smile his fake smile, act as if nothing was wrong, and then wait for the moment they were alone. "Mama doesn't believe me," she thought, her chest tight with sorrow. "I wish Papa would come home." She dreamed of her father's warm hugs and the way he called her, "my princess." She hoped, prayed, and waited, but the days dragged on, and Giwa was still away. The sun was setting, painting the sky in streaks of orange and purple as Giwa returned from his long journey. His steps were tired, but his heart was full of joy to see his family again. As he approached the house, he heard noises coming from inside, screams, faint but filled with fear. Giwa froze for a moment. "Salma," he called, thinking his wife might be in trouble. He dropped his bags and rushed toward the door. Bursting into the house, he stopped in his tracks. What he saw made his blood boil. Mr. Mako, the lesson teacher, was on top of his daughter, Lima, forcing himself on her. Her face was wet with tears, her hands pushing weakly against him. "Lima!" Giwa roared, his voice shaking the walls. Mr. Mako turned, his face pale as if he had seen a ghost. He scrambled to his feet, panicked like a cornered rat. Seeing Giwa's rage, he dashed toward the window, desperate to escape. "Stop him!" Giwa shouted, but before anyone could move, Mr. Mako leapt through the window. The night air was filled with the sickening sound of his body hitting the ground hard. A loud cry of pain followed. Giwa ran outside and found Mr. Mako sprawled on the ground, his leg twisted at an odd angle. He was writhing in pain, unable to move. Giwa grabbed him by the collar, lifting him like a sack of grain. "You dare touch my daughter?" Giwa growled, his voice low and dangerous. His fist clenched as he shook the man. "Please forgive me," Mr. Mako whimpered, his voice trembling. I thought no one would know. There's never anyone at home. I took advantage." His words hit Giwa like a slap. The weight of his absence, of leaving Lima unprotected, crashed over him like a tidal wave. Tears filled Giwa's eyes, but his anger did not waver. He dragged Mr. Mako back into the house, his mind set on one thing: making the man pay for what he had done. Inside, Lima sat trembling in a corner, her small frame shaking with sobs. "It's over, my daughter," Giwa said, his voice softer now as he knelt beside her. "I am here. No one will hurt you again." But the fire of his rage was not yet extinguished. He looked at Mr. Mako, still groaning in pain, and knew the man's punishment had only just begun. Giwa's fury burned hotter than the midday sun as he dragged Mr. Mako through the dusty streets of Goma town. The man's broken leg dragged limply behind him, and he whimpered in pain, but Giwa's grip never loosened. People peeked out of their homes, their eyes widening at the sight. "What's happening?" someone whispered. "It's the lesson teacher," another gasped. "What has he done?" Giwa said nothing, his face set like stone, but his eyes told the story, a story of betrayal, anger, and sorrow. By the time he reached the king's palace, a crowd had formed behind him, murmuring in shock and disbelief. The palace guards, tall and fierce, stood at the gates. "What is this, Giwa?" one of them asked, stepping forward. "This man," Giwa growled, tossing Mr. Mako at their feet, "dared to harm my daughter. He forced himself on her in my own home." The crowd erupted in outrage. Shouts of "monster" and "shame on him" filled the air. The guards didn't wait for more explanation. They grabbed Mr. Mako and dragged him inside the palace. The king, a wise and just ruler, listened carefully as Giwa told him everything. Lima's tears, Mr. Mako's confession, and the burden of being a father who had trusted the wrong man. All of it spilled out like water from a broken pot. The king's face darkened with anger. "Such evil cannot go unpunished," he declared. "Guards, make sure this man pays for his wickedness." The guards wasted no time. They beat Mr. Mako with sticks and threw him into the deepest, darkest cell in the palace prison. The news spread quickly through the town, and by nightfall, everyone knew what had happened. People came to Giwa's house in droves, bringing food and gifts, their voices full of sympathy. "You are a good man, Giwa," they said. "We are here for Lima. She is like a daughter to us all." Their support wrapped around Lima like a warm blanket, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she saw a glimmer of hope. But Giwa's anger was not yet spent. He turned his thoughts to Salma, the mother who had failed to protect her daughter. With fire in his eyes, he prepared to confront her, determined to hold her accountable for the role she had played in their pain. When Giwa returned home with Lima, he found Salma standing before a mirror, painting her face with bright colors. She hummed to herself, completely unaware of the storm brewing in her own home. A pile of fine clothes lay on the bed, ready for another night of parties. "Salma!" Giwa's voice thundered through the house. Startled, Salma turned, a brush still in her hand. "Why are you shouting, Giwa? I'm getting ready to go out." "Go out?" Giwa's face darkened with rage. "While your daughter suffers? While your house burns from your neglect? Look at her." He pointed to Lima, who stood quietly in the corner, her face pale and her eyes swollen from crying. "What's the matter with her?" Salma asked, waving dismissively. "Children cry all the time." Giwa's patience snapped like a dry twig. He grabbed Salma's clothes and threw them across the room. He knocked over her jewelry box, sending necklaces and earrings scattering to the floor. "You are no mother," Giwa roared. "You left your child alone, and a monster came into our home because of you. You let her cry for help, and you never listened. You failed her, Salma. You failed us all." Salma stood frozen, her face pale. "What are you talking about, Giwa?" she stammered. But Giwa did not stop. He stormed out of the house, dragging Salma behind him. The townspeople, already gathered to support Lima, looked on as Giwa exposed Salma's neglect for all to hear. "She left my daughter alone for parties. She never cared to know what was happening under her own roof," Giwa shouted. The crowd erupted in anger. "Shame on her," they cried. "What kind of mother abandons her child?" Women shook their heads in disbelief. Men muttered curses under their breath. Children whispered, "That's Lima's mother." Objects began to fly. Rotten fruit, stones, anything the townspeople could find. Salma shielded her face, her heart sinking with every insult hurled her way. "Giwa, please," she begged, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry. I didn't know." "Sorry?" Giwa interrupted. "It's too late for sorry. Leave this town. You are no wife of mine and you are no mother to Lima." Salma tried to protest, but the crowd's anger drowned her words. They pushed her out of the town, their shouts chasing her into the distance. That night, Salma sat alone under the open sky, tears falling like rain. She realized too late what she had lost: her home, her family, and the love of her daughter. With Salma gone, the house felt quieter but warmer. Giwa sat with Lima, holding her close as if to shield her from the world. "My princess," he said softly, "I'm here now. No one will hurt you again." Lima looked up at her father, her tears drying for the first time in days. In his arms, she felt safe, like a bird finally finding its nest. Giwa promised to protect her, to never leave her side again. "We will rebuild together," he said, his voice steady. Lima began to heal. Her laughter, once lost, slowly returned, like the first drops of rain after a long drought. She went back to school, her confidence growing with each passing day. Her teachers noticed the change. "Lima is back," they whispered with smiles. The townspeople continued to support her, treating her like their own daughter. Gifts of food, clothes, and books filled the house. "You are not alone," they told her. Lima's bond with her father grew stronger. She worked hard in her studies, determined to make him proud. Giwa, in turn, became her greatest cheerleader, always reminding her of her strength and worth. In time, the scars of the past faded. Lima's future shone bright again, like the rising sun over Goma town. She knew her father was her hero, her protector, and her greatest source of hope. Together, they rebuilt their lives, leaving the shadows of pain behind them. I hope you enjoyed the tale. If so, please like the video, share it with your family and friends, comment on it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell for more enchanting tales like this one. Goodbye.